Welcome everyone to the wrap and web launch of the
Woohoo!
End Housing Alienation Now Across Canada Superstudio. I'm Adrian Blackwell. I'm an associate professor at the University of Waterloo and a member of the Architects Against Housing Alienation Organizing Committee. I'm going to start with land acknowledgement. This Cross Canada Super Studio is centrally concerned with the rights of all people to affordable housing, environmental justice, and equity. Across all of the sites that we'll be focusing on throughout this semester, and the last two semesters, there have been ongoing issues of disparity and oppression that were initiated through violent processes of European colonization that included the displacement of Indigenous people from their lands. These lands were those that sustained them across Turtle Island and which constituted their home. Within this studio, we seek to recognize and respect the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples of these regions, and their inherent right to be at home in the cities now occupying their lands, in order to design a more accessible, ecologically sound, and economically sustainable home for all human and more than human life. So today we've got 2 hours, and I'm just going to go quickly through the agenda. We're going to start with a discussion about 75 minutes in length of the work from different schools, and we're going to begin it by having David Fortin, Sarah Stevens, and Matthew Souls from Architects Against Housing Alienation presenting a couple of projects from each of the studios around three different themes, which are essential to, I think, the work of these studios and the concept of housing alienation. Around issues of ecological alienation, social alienation, and subjective alienation. And then we've got almost an hour where we have three critics we're really excited to hear from uh, Billy Fleming, Florian Summa, and Marianne Amodio. We're hoping that they can engage the work of the studio in a rich discussion, and there'll also be opportunity for everyone else here to jump in either in the chat or by raising your hand to participate in the conversation. Maybe I can introduce the three guests. So, Billy Fleming is an interdisciplinary scholar of climate justice and the built environment. He's an assistant professor at Temple University in Philadelphia, and we've invited him because he initiated and led an amazing initiative called the Green New Deal Superstudio, which this superstudio was modeled on, and which was a lot more elaborate than our efforts, but I think had similar ambitions to try to network the work of amazing faculty and students across an even broader geographic area in that case, not just in Canada, but in North America and even, I think, elsewhere. Florian Summa is the co-founder of Summa Cum Femur, and they're designers of San Remo housing project in Munich, which I think a lot of students, certainly in the Waterloo studios, but I think in a lot of studios have been looking at. It's an amazing planning exercise in thinking about flexibility and subjective agency within housing. He was also the co-curator of the 2023 German Pavilion at the Venice Biennale of Architecture, which was called Open for Maintenance and really challenged the idea of architecture as a static object and really thought about the reuse of materials within the biennial, but also within the city of Venice. And we have Marianne Modio, who's co-founder of the Vancouver architecture firm MA and HG. Um, they're designers of Vancouver's Our Urban Village, which is a co-housing project, and which I think we've been looking at disalienated housing in Vancouver and Toronto, and we see this project as a really exceptional example of disalienated housing in Vancouver. And she's an advocate for housing and design. So we're really excited to have the three of you here. Thanks so much for jumping on this call and participating in looking at the work of these studios. So The Superstudio, I'm sorry, after we've had our discussion, we're going to have a 20-minute discussion about the Superstudio collective, and what we've done this year and where it might go in the future. Um, and we reserve 10 minutes at the end just for this discussion about moving forward. What are the most effective pedagogical models above and beyond Superstudios? Are there other models? What kinds of outputs could come from this? So this Super Studio was launched last fall in September 2025, and we had 9 studios active in the fall term, and we have 9 studios active in the spring term. I think we have the work from 10 studios currently online. Not all studios put up work, and actually some of the studios ran over 2 terms. That's part of the reason there were 9. Um, it involved the following schools: the Université de Montréal, Carleton University, Toronto Metropolitan University, the University of Toronto, the University of Waterloo, Laurentian University, University of Manitoba, University of Calgary, Athabasca University, the University of British Columbia, and the BC Institute of Technology. Um, and there were other schools like McGill and Dalhousie that were participating, but for different reasons were unable to continue the participation. Um, the Super Studio was sponsored by an organization that brings together all the schools of architecture in Canada, the Canadian Council for University Schools of Architecture, CCUSA, and also by Architects Against Housing Alienation. Um, the studio was a very loose structure. So um, every studio deals with the question of housing alienation in a very different way. And the studios weren't custom made for this super studio. They existed in different forms and were networked into the super studio. But they do share a set of common principles, which you can find on the website. Maybe, Sarah, if you could go down to the principles area. So there were 4 primary principles, which were Indigenous solidarity, housing decommodification, holistic quality, which we framed in relation to the connection to the natural ecology, the community of family and friends and neighbors, and a sense of creative agency. And finally, the idea of collaboration, collaboration with non-architects and other participants in the building of disalienated housing. The studio also involved a set of lectures. We had quite a large number of lectures. I think we had 9 in the winter term, and we had maybe 4 or 5 in the fall term. So different faculty members from different schools gave lectures which were available to everyone across the country. And then we had common launches and we had common wraps for both terms. And we also did some more ad hoc common reviews. So I think that gives you a little picture of what we've been up to at a very, very high level. And I think I'm going to pass it over to David Fortin, who's going to introduce questions of ecological connection in across a set of studios that have participated in the Super Studio.
Great. Thanks, Adrian. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just, oh, yeah. Let's pull up my screen here. So the first, maybe just show me a thumb up if you guys are seeing that. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to run through a sample of this. Many of the studio projects that we've scrolled through from the studios had elements of ecological disalienation, let's call it, as kind of central to their thinking. I think it's more or less in some ways embedded in much design thinking these days. But I've selected these 6 to kind of just show a scan of some of the variations. So this first one is from the University of Manitoba, so Sean Bailey's studio, which was looking at Indigenous thinking and materiality and different modes of fabrication. And this one you can see from the left, this idea that the conception for the project comes from a fragment of birch bark, often left behind, and that this birch bark piece becomes leads a material-led design process. thinking about where materials are sourced and how architecture participates in both the ecological and social systems. And so if you look through the drawings, there's this kind of, the intention for the project comes from a very close reading of the land and obviously the flora of the region, and how that can be woven into a sense of place and home. And then it's kind of scaled up into this multi-residential building. So, on each of these, I don't think any of us are going to go too deeply into them, but I'm just kind of going to scroll through and show you some of the ways this student is looking at that materiality, as central to the conceptualization of the project. Here you can see they're talking about a birch bark cork, which I'm not familiar with, and I did a quick search on. I don't know if it's a real thing, but this is central to their thinking, was a different kind of materiality that would come from here you see birch bark cork prototype, made from shredded birch bark and birch bark tar. And so I think it's just an interesting idea on how, some of these indigenous principles related to materials, they're harder to translate into urban living, but this student has made an attempt to do that, I think, in a really kind of beautiful project. The next one is, I just want to, are you seeing the next one as well? I'm looking at you, Sarah. Yep. Okay, good. The next one is called Brighter Waters, from TMU. So this was Parle Cheryl Studios. This one I thought was quite interesting. It looks at sort of ecological, and I would say contextual sensitivity in a very nice way. Obviously, there are the mature trees on the site, are a central feature of the design logic. So the buildings actually carve themselves out to the canopy of these existing trees. You can see through the landscaping that, these indoor-outdoor spaces are critical. They have also very kind of, more urban scale intervention, whereby they are responding to many different contexts within the site. I won't go into that too much, but here you see again the kind of concept of using these mature trees. And then another important factor for this project was also thinking about carbon footprint, and materiality, and so, also, heritage. And so the idea of densifying through housing, not at the expense of demolishing existing housing, and then also repurposing the brick from a local building. And so there's lots of ideas within this one that is not just as simple as connecting to the outdoors, but I think thinking of ecology more as a uh, uh, related to manufacturing and how we think of materials. The third project is from UBC. So this one is called, where is it? Urban Stitches. So I wasn't familiar with the berm, but Sarah gave me a bit of a lesson on this. But what's interesting about this one to me is it sort of is on an urban edge, and so the housing project relates to the linear logic of the urban scenario, and then it sort of peels off from that and embeds itself into the context, and into the ecology. So there's some beautiful renderings here. There's also this nice idea of thinking about the housing projects as an ecosystem, and so that from the unit to the neighborhood, you can see. And again, here are just some nice site plans showing how this housing integrates into the berm. I'll just go down to the section because it sort of is, the sections are the most telling. So here again, you have these connections between courtyard space and the more park-like environment of the berm. And here you get the berm itself. And so thinking about how the buildings are, I think, weaving nicely into this idea of transit, forest, and the geological conditions of the berm. Also, this is quite nice. I really like these diagrams, which show sort of, again, the role of the courtyard and also how the courtyards relate to this one, the active living ecosystem. So in this, they're demonstrating that they're thinking about rain gardens and bioswales, constructed wetlands, also pollinator meadows, even dog waste, bottle refill and drinking So they're really thinking about how the building relates to its surroundings as an ecosystem, which is a nice project. The next one is from our studio. So Adrian and I worked with these students. This is a quite interesting project. Our studio focused on not-for-profit owned properties throughout Kitchener, Ontario, that could be developed for housing, and a lot of them ended up being suburban sites. This one is owned by a co-op called the J. Steckel Heritage Farm, and there are these heritage buildings that are here, and it's sort of the remnants of this person, John Steckel, who worked with the United Nations, particularly on Northern and Indigenous communities and food sovereignty. And so there's a lot of agricultural fields on the site. So the students preserved the most productive agricultural sites and then also densified, adding a lot of units to this, and thinking about a research center for food growing and production, sustainable food, and then also kind of think about the buildings forming a new courtyard with the existing heritage building here. So again, trying to think about more of an urban space created beside this more agricultural space. And so the project is quite intricate in terms of different housing typologies. I won't go into any detail on this, but I wanted to just highlight that that idea of food sovereignty and connecting back to the foods where they come from. It even comes to the unit scale where they put, these little gardens, and thinking about how the food from that garden gets to the table. And then if this unit was an adaptable unit and they removed this wall, how you then would have these large dining areas where people would come together around the food. And so it becomes an exterior component of the project too. This is one from the University of Calgary. So this is the studio that Mauricio ran. And, it's quite a quirky, but we think an interesting way to think about housing in more like out of the box thinking of actually living on top of the river. And so a family community that connects itself, more, this is something more we'd see in the tropics, but than the Bow River, but thinking about different family types and typologies, and again connecting to themselves and to the landscape in a kind of innovative way. So we thought that was interesting. And then this is just symbolic in many ways. This one is from, again, the University of Toronto studio. I believe this is with Karen. But a good example of many projects that we saw flipping through them where courtyard spaces are not leftover thoughts, but actually are central to the way people think about housing and offering spaces for gardening, for instance, outdoor play space for children, or just sitting and relaxing and this one I think you kind of see the indoor-outdoor relationships, rooftops that become activated for gardening and just being outside. And I think it's interesting within the context of this, it really shows this kind of urban frontage. And then inside is this kind of ecological lens. So those are just a sample of some of the ones that we found. And like I said, many of them had similar approaches. And so I'll stop there and hand it over to, I'm not sure if it's Matthew or Sarah next, but I will just stop sharing. Thanks.
Thanks, David. I'm the one who's going to take over now. Okay. So if David was discussing the ways that we have framed alienation as being about alienation from ecological, I'm going to talk about the framing of alienation as a separation from your creative agency, the kind of sense of creative agency that people have. So I've broken this down and we'll show you a few projects that relate to program, removing barriers for full social inclusion, and flexible design. So this first project is looking at how is program a way that you can kind of give back that sense of creative agency to residents. And it comes from Cheryl Atkinson's studio. Cheryl's here, I think. And it's a student named Tiffany Zhao, whose project is called Assemblage Field. And Tiffany was actually taught also, I think, by Viz Sankrithi. So this is a mixed use residential project that includes a variety of different and quite fun creative programs, arts focused programs that include like a graffiti studio that you can see down here, a community workshop area, a fashion design studio. So this range of different uses that are all intended to support the creative life of the community and to mix everyday life with these creative capabilities, which we really appreciated in the project. Sorry, I'm scrolling too fast past the images. Another project that we liked came from Karen Kubi's studio. So this is Architects Against Slavery by Usama Nassim. And so here in this project, the student is looking at the migrant farm workers in Canada in the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, which is seen by the United Nations as this breeding ground for contemporary forms of slavery. So the project is reimagining a community for 550 workers, farm workers in Leamington, Ontario, and attempts to create, so these are analysis drawings that talk about the existing conditions. It seems like the student actually worked with a former farm worker in this region to try and understand the conditions that people live in, and then proposed this new and dignified form of housing for these residents that we thought was really quite strong. And so here we're seeing a project that's really trying to take on the removal of these barriers to full social inclusion, and creating, again, kind of space for this full sense of creative agency within the housing, within the shared spaces and the connections between the units that the housing offers. And this fabulous drawing of the globe on the tomato. Another project that did this was also from Karen's studio. This is A Place to Stay, Reparative Architecture for Black Cultural Continuity in Little Jamaica by Barira Iqbal. And so this project we really appreciated too, because it really builds on one of the original AHA demands, which was a demand for reparative architecture. So this project is proposing a mixed-use building that spans the laneway quite beautifully in Toronto's Little Jamaica neighborhood, and includes all kinds of programming that are designed to support the creative life and the connections of the Black community in Little Jamaica, as this community is facing a lot of gentrification from incoming infrastructure improvements, transit improvements that are really changing the dynamics of the neighborhood. But the drawings are quite beautiful. They really teem with life and activity and energy, and also seems to really understand its context in a quite sophisticated way. So the different types of housing units, here you can see how it really spans this across this reggae lane. And here are some of these drawings that show its activity and connections between places. So like a braiding, hair salon for braiding, cafe spaces, programs that are really intended to kind of nurture the creative life of the community and the neighborhood. Okay. And then another way that this happens, this reconnection to creative agency we see in the projects, was through flexible design. So this is a project that came from Mauricio's studio at Calgary by Aza Mather and Christine Keys, and it's called Convergence. So this project is designed for a very suburban landscape in Canmore, British Columbia, and it's proposing multifamily housing that's really quite flexible and a design that can support the creative life for the residents who are sharing this building. I actually think for this one, it's hard to see and understand the project until you actually dig in here. Sorry, this is going to be a little awkward. To see how it's used the Baugruppen model as a kind of way through to understand how units of housing can be cooperatively placed together and shared in a building and on a site to create this kind of shared community life that we think is really important. And then I think the last project I'll share is this one. So this is one from a studio that was taught by Adrian. So this is the Infill Affordable Housing Studio, and the project is called Courtyard Commons, Intergenerational Infill Housing in Kensington Market by Kaylin Schallenberg. So here is this project really focuses on intergenerational living, which also we argue allows for creativity to flourish. So the units in this building can be adapted. The student did a lot of work to really draw up how the adaptability can happen. So you'll see that in the drawings to different household types or needs, and really thinks through how the shared and flexible spaces in the building could support and kind of allow for creativity to flourish in the building. So beautiful drawings, really thoughtful plans, and then these hatched areas show where there's outdoor shared spaces that are interior spaces adjacent to those outdoor spaces when the weather conditions aren't ideal. And here you can see a little bit more how the flexibility of the design was really thought through by the student in the unit plans themselves. So how could spaces be kind of flexible and become interior spaces or exterior spaces, repurposed as needed? Here we go. So this is just another of the many projects on the website now that are really, really thoughtful, really beautifully drawn work by the students that's sensitive to the urban context, sensitive to how needs will change over time, and kind of really situating a project within the neighborhood that it's going to be part of. Okay, I'll pass it over to Matthew now.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, let me share my screen. Okay, can everybody see that? Great. So my name's Matthew Souls. So I'm going to just share a few projects on the lens of disalienation around social connection. Of course, a key aspect of alienation in our society is how we're pulled away from each other. So these projects are just shown through the lens of how they bring people together at multiple scales and foster a stronger sense of community. So the first project is called Tower Within with its Park, re-envisioning St. James Town's housing towers and their parklands. And this is Karen Kuby's studio at University of Toronto called Architecture and the Right to Housing. So St. James Towns is an existing building complex in Toronto. I'm going to go down here. This on the left, you can see the existing floor plan that is typical of the existing St. James Town. And on the right is this retrofit adaptation that the student is proposing. And I just want to read, I think their description here is really great. So, what they plan to do, or what they're proposing, is deploying a speculative public-private retrofit funding model. This project upgrades infrastructure, integrates environmental strategies, and reconfigures units for diverse households with flexible partitions and expanded balcony enclosures, while reclaiming shared grounds through vibrant ground floor communal programs and diverse green space. So the project is remarkable how it works at multiple scales, I think. So you see a sectional axisymmetric where you see this enclosed balcony system that is put on the front on both sides of these bars. And here is this really amazing set of quite beautifully developed floor plans for different units. So the top two rows are all kind of modifications of suite type A in various ways of how this balcony allows for catalyzes, let's say, I think quite significant transformation that enhances, I would say, the alienation that can happen even inside a unit. I think alienation, of course, happens at multiple scales, inside a unit, among units, among buildings, a site, and through the city. Here, this is quite fascinating. How the balcony, in some instances, has a stair within it and allows discrete, what were previously discrete, quite small units to become vertically extensive units to accommodate different sizes of families. So the building really it expands itself in multiple directions through this enclosed balcony system. And then inside the units also planimetrically quite interesting integration of different kind of storage modules and sliding doors that facilitate again this kind of dynamism within the unit itself. And integration of enhanced community programs like daycares. And then here we go back to inside one of these interior balconies to just see the sense of light, the sense of materiality, and the kind of warmth. I think the site plan shows a lot about how the student is thinking about the integration of the shared public ground and the interior of the units, this kind of blurring between the life of the courtyards, the interstitial spaces between the blocks and the interiority, and how this kind of merging of social life, ecological life, and kind of family life. So the next project is at BCIT in the Graduating Project Studio. The title is Neighborhood Within. So all of the projects in the graduating studio at BCIT this term worked on the same site and the same program, actually. They're all situated in New Westminster, which is part of Metro Vancouver, in the more eastern extent of Metro Vancouver. a fairly dense site, and the program is to integrate or explore the relationship between a library and affordable housing. And so this student essentially figured out a way to distribute a series of framed voids that we're seeing here within the color blocks that would all situate shared programmatic spaces where residents could come together and use space in a collective fashion, and also library space down below in this collective fashion. So there's a very clear diagrammatic system to the kind of ratio between housing units and shared space. And that happens both planimetrically and vertically. There's an embedded critique here of the alienation that occurs, or let's say is most emblematic in the North American suburb, and how that is tackled at the scale of a relatively dense urban mixed-use building. So this is the ground floor plan that's showing the library and how the thinking of these voids also plays out inside the library and in the housing units. And here's a quite remarkable section that shows the courtyard housing structure at the top, library at the bottom, and I think this really remarkable outdoor play space that is at the center of the courtyard and kind of bridging, let's say, the space of the library that has its own kind of code mandated separation, fire, structural issues. But this kind of blurring between the world of the housing above and the library below. Here's a little perspective vignette at one of the shared spaces between the housing units. Here are the upper housing unit floor plans, again showing the relationship between those voids and fairly efficient but generous or livable units. And views of the courtyard. And here I think is a quite nice view programmatically, which shows the entrance of the library on the ground floor and then seeing up into that sunken play space. So the juxtaposition of exterior play and kind of civic entry, quite nicely produced. So the next project is from TMU, and it is in the counter-proposal studio, and its title is Reclaiming the Ground Plane. And this is quite a remarkable project that I'm going to just jump down to explain it maybe right here with these very clear diagrams. So there is an existing structure right here, and the students are proposing the introduction of three mid-rise tower blocks that sit on a lower-rise podia. And the podia is where family units exist, and smaller units are in the higher mid-rise blocks. But I think what's quite fascinating about this project is how it takes this density and distributes it across the site in relation to the ground and also an elevated ground that sits in between the podia and the blocks above. And you can see this right here, that there's a kind of daycare program and amenity-wide or building-wide amenity program that is kind of in this interstitial space. So it's not, let's say, the typical Vancouver tower and podium model. It's a kind of breaking apart of that and weaving in greater sort of social opportunities within the building. The ground floor, let's see here. The ground floor is quite remarkable. Let's say in Vancouver, where we're used to the very used to the podia tower model, the podia are relatively impenetrable. What's fascinating here is that these students have created a kind of extremely porous ground plane that is almost like a market bazaar, which comes across in this sort of pixelated and remarkable drawing right here. But great sense of attention to detail at different scales in the project. Here you see a vignette or an ISO of that lower ground plane and its sort of scale. So now moving on to the very last project I think I'll show today. This is again at BCIT. So BCIT ran two studios this term. The title of this studio is Rezoned Adaptive Housing on Underused Church Land. So this project, Urban Pulse, I'll go here to the site plan. On the right is an existing church building. And this student proposed four blocks of mid-rise housing that are arranged, I think, quite sensitively on the site with the church as an anchor building around this kind of courtyard that is porous to its exterior. Um, Double aspect through units that are organized around, I think, let's say a convivial living, dining, and cooking space. Very simple, very straightforward. And then the circulation is entirely single loaded and on the exterior, which in Vancouver's climate works very well year round. And that exteriority in relation to the through units, well, I should say, I think comes together as you see in this massing model in a quite delicate scaling of buildings. And you can see here that this sort of the red thickened exterior circulation affords a kind of almost like a social thickening of the skin that integrates the building both vertically and horizontally in its sort of title, Urban Pulse. So that's the last project I think I'll show.
Thanks, Matthew. So I think what we would like to do is open it up to Billy, Florian, and Marianne to have a discussion. I mean, we'll also jump in, but we want to give you lots of space to kind of space and time to think about this work. And I think we reached out about, you may have some examples you want to point to as well. And we can open those up on screen. And certainly we'd like to be looking at the work while we're talking about it. Um, so yeah, I think we're just going to open the floor.
Great. I just wanted to say hello. Can you hear me? Um, I came a bit late. Sorry for that. My name is Florian from Germany, and I just had some internet problems, but I'm really happy to be part of your crit today. Um, and I spent quite a lot of time in the morning and almost got lost in um, browsing through all the projects and trying to find out all the different aspects of alienation. And it's so interesting how differently these projects address this term. And I think throughout the like here is evening now, throughout my evening with you in this crit, I will try to find out what our European German problems with housing alienations have in common with the problems you have, because I think in the end there's also some issues which are globally in the end, and we have the same problems in Germany. And so I think I will just listen a lot today, but also try to comment from my perspective from Germany on that.
Yeah, I might just jump in after Florian, and I'm in an airport, so if you hear a lot of squawking or people talking, that's why. So apologies for that. But um, one, I just wanted to say for Sarah and Adrian and Matthew and David and Patrick, like this is incredible. I'm just kind of blown away by the thematic and qualitative consistency across the projects. Um, and just like how central you and your faculty and student colleagues have made housing justice to all of these other quality of life or cost of living crisis challenges that I think we often like to talk about in design and don't always find time or space to address in such meaningful ways. And I'll just say too, like having done a version of this on the US side, I hope you're all due for like a long holiday or sabbatical or break after pulling this together. And so I'll maybe like just kind of jump into a few projects if that's okay. And it was very hard to select two or three. I think that was kind of the charge you put to us, just because the consistency and the quality is so high across the board. And even like this site is just so lovely and easy to use. I like can only imagine how long a tail or long a life this will have after the Superstudio is over for others, not just in Canada but elsewhere. But there were kind of three projects, one of which I think you mentioned, one of which sort of, and you know, I picked them because they kind of speak to particular themes that I think about a lot in kind of my own work. One of which deals with kind of housing stability or security through a range of things, including flexible floor plates and walls and structures that kind of allow families to grow and shrink over the span of their lives. One that deals with the mode of practice and architecture that's maybe more concerned with finding existing pockets of organizing power or hubs of community organizing, and less about looking for an existing RFP or commission. And then one that I think Sarah talked about here, dealing with sort of labor practices and the role architecture plays in housing them. And so the first one is As It Grows by Alexa Woodworth and René Gorber, Wakabayashi at University of Waterloo. This may have been your studio, Adrian, I'm not sure. But, you know, of the things I think were like especially compelling about this project. Yeah, sorry, it is As It Grows.
Yeah, it's the other studio. It's
Yeah.
David and I co-coordinated it, but Reza,
Okay.
Marie Paul McDonald, and Sam Eby also
Cool.
taught it. Yeah.
Yeah, and just, you know, as you're kind of like flicking through, I'll just say some of the things that I thought were particularly thoughtful in both the kind of writing, which I thought was spectacular across the board for many of these projects, and also the images are just one, a real focus on wraparound services and kind of community-based amenities. So thinking about childcare, senior care, not just commercial or retail activity, but kind of the full life cycle of things people need to like thrive where they live. And you know, there are lots of others here I could imagine, but I think there's a really compelling start for thinking about how you meet people where they are at whatever point in their life through a single development. Also, the flexibility in this particular project, the way it offers kind of an opportunity to grow, to change, expand, shrink units as your family grows and shrinks over the years. And I think they were very smart to build a lot of adaptability into this project to kind of allow it. You know, perhaps a period of kind of learning the residents, thinking about, you know, what sorts of tenants belong on the ground floor in terms of, you know, social services or commercial activity, whatever it might be. And then I just would say too, I mean, it's a beautifully rendered, incredibly clear and compelling project. And, you know, in many of these kind of axonometric drawings that are looking across the screen and many of the renders, I kept thinking of, you know, maybe like the highest compliment I can give to a social housing project, which is just like Lacaton of the Sal's Grand Park social housing project in Bordeaux. Lots of the same kind of spatial and visual strategies employed here. So just a really compelling project in lots of ways. The second one that I kind of tagged was Alexandra Park Counterproposal by Jade Brunker and Jihui Shuang from Toronto Metropolitan University. And this is one, yeah, it's the middle one there, I think. Thank you. You know, this is one that did just a kind of remarkable job of, and this may have been the studio brief, I don't know, but I'm going to just credit the students because that's kind of my default here is, you know, picking a place that has been a site of intense tenant and resident organizing for decades, despite being cleared as part of kind of a slum clearance program in Canada, being rebuilt, being redeveloped, and now being kind of marked for demolition and redevelopment once again. And nevertheless, having this incredible hub of community activity who've already developed at kind of an abstract level, their own set of counter proposals or demands for what should happen here. And for, you know, the pair of designers being really thoughtful about how they try to keep as many people as they can in this community while also allowing it to grow and change and densify and add new programmatic uses over time. So they're not just trying to freeze this place in amber, but they're trying to make sure that they, you know, allow for it to grow and evolve while being really careful and respectful about the folks who already live there. It just seems, you know, incredibly practical to me in lots of ways. And yeah, of course, like beautiful drawings kind of throughout. And then the last one, and then I'll shut up for a little while, is Usama Nasim's Architects Against Slavery that I think Sarah mentioned as well. And just will say, you know, for this one, because we talked a bit about it, I'll be a little quicker. You know, you're wading into such a rich ground for ongoing research, both for yourself and for others, and even for practice as you start to think about maybe where you want to end up after you finish your architecture degree. Um, and kind of using not just the site where labor is performed, which is important, but also I think relatively um, well covered in other areas of architectural research. I know I see Karen in the chat. I know Summa's here. Um, and thinking about like other areas of architectural research that go beyond the site where labor is performed, which is important, but to the sites where, you know, you architects, I'm not an architect, but you architects are designing, um, you know, homes and apartments and structures where people go after these grueling days, building and maintaining our food systems, our housing systems, and so on. Um, and I think for Fuasama and for others, just speaks to the importance of trying to think about where you end up as a designer, and whether it's in a commercial office or in a government office where you might have some role in thinking about, the ways in which policy frameworks that shape the RFP or the NOFA or the funding or financing stream that drives so much of architectural practice get shaped. So going to places where the rules are made to make it easier for our colleagues in practice, who are often frustrated, I think, by the limitations that building and housing and architecture policy place on them, to maybe be able to practice differently. So lots more I could say about all of these, but I'm just, again, blown away by, I think, what you all have been able to achieve here together. And really excited to see what you do with all of this incredible work.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would absolutely echo what Billy has said here about the breadth and the care and just the structural organization of this studio and the interconnectivity of the work and is remarkable. I'm like work in this realm. I've worked in this realm for my entire career, and I find this work really inspiring, and I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful that so many young people are taking up this charge. I think what I see here holistically is this kind of urge to connect. Like all the projects thematically sort of reveal that to me, whether that's a connection to land, connection to each other, connection to people of different generations, connection to different programs. And I think that weaving and interconnectivity is the balm that we need as we start to realize that our, I guess, cult of individualism that we've promoted for so many years culturally is really the end of us. It really defines the end of us if we continue on this way, in my view. I think that mixing is just so critical and important, and it's so seen in all this work, that desire to mix. And I think I'll leave my hopes for maybe the end, but I've been in Edmonton at my parents' house, the house I grew up in. I'm sitting here in my dad's den. So the Thresholds of Care project that Charmaine Wong from University of Toronto really struck me. And I was really happy to see it because I think what we did for many years in Canada, I grew up in Alberta, I live in Vancouver now. My husband's family grew up in Winnipeg, but it was almost as though we built like there were no old people. Like it's like we stopped building housing and now we're going to build it again, and we're building it again in a like frenzied way because we need to catch up to all the years of neglect and deferred maintenance and all of that. But it's almost as though at the time that this house was built, my parents' house in the suburbs of Edmonton, it was like they were built assuming that everyone was going to be like 30 years old with 2 kids. So what interests me about this project is that it really addresses what I see as being like a problem that my own parents are contending with right now. is that they love their home. This home is so rich with meaning, with memory, but it's a burden and it's isolating. And all of their friends like live in these isolated homes and they have to drive to get together. And then if the weather's bad, like forget it. It's just they're in their homes, they're alone, and they're managing. So I was really, really interested in this project. I thought it was really innovative. I think it saw that problem and is trying to find a solution for something that already exists. And I think the programming, the intergenerational programming, the mixed programming, the like disintegration of zoning. Like I think one of our biggest problems that we still have that, we have so much work to do. When I look at even the next project that I'll bring up, like a lot of our ideologies about how buildings should be are really reflected in a lot of these projects. And those are really like podium. Podium is public area. Like maybe there's some townhouses there. Then there's a tower, and in that tower are like all the small teeny tiny units. So what I love about this project is it's really rupturing that. I think it's exciting that it's rupturing that sense of what is right in or the way things should be. Yeah, I think this is a perfect example, like creating additions, creating front porches, creating co-op gardens, inviting like the disintegration of fences. Like, I think that this is actually a really, really important work because if this is a zoning that we can change, we've done a lot of work in just trying to disintegrate exclusionary zoning and discriminatory zoning. And I think this project sort of takes that one step further into our communities that are, I think in Vancouver and other more, well, even here actually in Edmonton, we're starting to see the disintegration of exclusionary single family zoning. So this project to me really, I think, was one of the most innovative that I saw in the time that I had to peruse. And I really appreciated that they were just busting out of these canons that we have, right? And we still hold them and we still see them every day. The other project, University of Waterloo, I don't know what's going on there, but it's like there's a real aesthetic being built that's common amongst a lot of the projects. Residents, Rachel, Eva, and Sarah's project. Like immediately beautiful. Like just this one here on the left, yeah, the green one here. Just the quality of the architectural design is immediately like beautiful, well thought out, and deeply correct, right? Like I think as a practicing architect, that bridge between idea and execution and how we execute our systems of building, the way we procure projects, the way that projects are delivered. I think it's like really evident in most of the University of Waterloo that I don't know if that's like innate or if that's being taught, but it feels like Rachel, Eva, and Sarah could leave tomorrow and come work at my office and hit the ground running with like a just really great base knowledge of how these buildings are delivered. So I really, really appreciate the the thoroughness and the intelligence of this work in a real way. Because that's what we seek in our practice is because we actually deliver buildings, like we work within that space between bridging theories or theories of social density or theories or ideologies or concepts or narratives between what can actually be built. And I really, really see that displayed clearly in this work. I think the urban strategy here is really important. It speaks back to that idea of connectivity that I was talking about at the beginning, about how an urban site can invite the public through in amongst in a way that contributes to the collective cultural welfare of a community. This looks like a resilient community to me. It reminds me of what we were striving at Tomo. Yeah, so I just thought this one, along with a whole handful of other University of Waterloo ones, were really just so rich and deeply, deeply like understood at detail at various scales of understanding. Finally, the one that I thought was interesting as well was the reparative architecture one. I think it was, Sarah, I think it was the first project that you showed, University of Manitoba. And I thought what was really interesting about that one was not only its effort at reconciliation, which, it was the other one actually. The one previous, the weaving, the birch shed. I'll speak for myself. I think our efforts at reconciliation are pretty lame. Like, I think we are really trying to integrate. I think for me, it's become more about the way that we do things, and the process that we undertake is trying to embed more, like doing things in a good way. I think that kind of language around indigeneity has struck me, but it's really hard. It's still really hard to integrate our systems, our colonial systems, with Indigenous ways of doing things. And even when we work with Indigenous groups, the product is still, if we call architecture a product, let's just call it that for this moment, is always the same. Because at the end of the day, it comes down to what can you afford? What are the most economical materials? What's the best practice? But I thought this one was really interesting because it studied materiality in a way that was rooted in, it reminded me of Superstudio, the student at UBC who's making the acoustic panels, the former student at UBC who's making the acoustic panels out of seaweed. And I think this kind of invention around, I think it's birch bark and tar. Annie Dahan, exactly, thanks, Matt. I just think this kind of invention, like, it's almost dismissed, I think, in professional practice. And I think it's so important that in schools we continue to allow students to explore what it means to build from the land, from our land. I'm just so impressed with this. I think all the professors are to be commended as well. Just the integration and the effort, the will, I think, is just huge. It's so inspiring. Thank you.
Maybe I could just continue at this point. I also wanted to talk about the project you, Marianne, showed previously from Waterloo, together with another project from there. I can quickly maybe paste the link into the chat. It was even one before, so if you open the one from the link first, maybe. I think what would be really interesting for me to understand, actually, and also to compare it to the problems we face in Europe here, is actually what are the most difficult points in order to prevent or that prevent us to do projects like this, which we see here, for example, where you have these really deep two housing blocks facing a communal garden with these allotments, and then these fat ground floors which have these inner atriums that connect the different levels with each other, and I think make a very nice connection throughout the building. And then like layers, the building wrapping around the building, it has these balconies facing the garden, the communal garden. And I think it's such a nice scheme, which you really want to see build. And like in Germany, like in our office, we also do competitions where we do schemes like this. And we are facing, I think, two major problems. Like the first field is regulations that there's fire regulations, for example, which are extremely strict, and would be really interesting to hear if regulations are also such a building regulations, such a problem, for example, to stop you from building atriums that span through a building with different stories, because obviously the easiest thing is to block each floor from each other to prevent the fire from going from one story to the next one, but also, of course, preventing every communication to go from one story to the other. So, and the other one is the limitation of money, in the sense that, of course, invested projects, they really try to reduce everything to a minimum, that everything is questions like this great balcony, or even like you wonder, like, why should we not build this this atrium into rentable space? And then when we work in Germany, like with cooperative, for examples, you can solve certain issues. For example, the money issue, that suddenly there's no is not the idea behind the project anymore to make profit out of the building. So you can work, so you can see a potential also in communication as something very important for the buildings, where you don't need to build additional space, but that is all about, yeah, building communications throughout the building. So you can solve that, but you cannot solve that within the ambition to, yeah, you cannot solve the regulation problems suddenly in Germany of this atrium, for example. So then suddenly we have to, gather with the cooperative, fight against these regulations. So it's the enemy is then suddenly so clear, but you still have to fight a lot. And I think that was interested in the other project, which maybe I can also paste the link quickly again, which Marianne also showed previously from Waterloo, which is, I would say, the opposite of this the beauty of the two fat blocks which we had. It's the extremely thin block which has these exterior, I don't know, maybe you call it deck access, which you see here now, where you enter the apartments from the outside. Oops, sorry. I have to enter the apartments from the outside, and then you have these triangles to create some privacy in front of the apartments. And if it goes down, I think this project is so extremely thought through. What kind of rooms do you place in front of these access corridor in order? Yeah, like it's the kitchen here where there's no issue of privacy anyways. So you don't have the sleeping rooms there, and you wonder, why would you not build something like this immediately? Because it's even an economic access, like in Switzerland or so, they build it out of economical terms reasons, because yeah, you don't need to heat it. But I guess it would be interesting for me to understand, yeah, what are the most blocking things that prevent you from building such great projects, if you, like we see here?
Yeah, Florian, this is how come I don't teach the housing studio at UBC. Because I feel like I'm just going to go in there and be like, no, your efficiency is too low. Like, but I think what I think so much of our work and what I see here and what I strive to relay to young people is their role. Like, I just believe that one of the major roles of an architect is as advocate. And I think that role as being the speaker, the public speaker of all the things that you're talking about, like why can't we have an atrium? You know, we
Mm,
all know it's better for our well-being. Why,
mm,
you know, in Vancouver, we lobby really hard all the time to have all amenity spaces um, um, excluded from FSR. Um, you know, and I think that that's part of, you know, the call to action that I was sort of waiting to put in at the end. That, and I hope that I see that in this work and in these students, that this urge um, to build like this and to design like this, that we all innately know is human centric and community minded and creates resilient communities, is a battle. There's a battle for this. There's not only a battle for this from a building code perspective or a zoning and development bylaw, but there's also kind of a battle for it at a community level, because I think we're still entrenched in this idea that apartment living and dense urban living, particularly in North America, is somehow lesser than. Um, and I think that that's an ideology that we all need to change, um, and advocate for. So I agree with you. I think a lot of the work that I see here is borderline, like a lot of it is unrealistic, and a lot of it is like there's so much VE in here, right? Like, yeah, I can just see like the little cutouts and the corridors. Like we tried that. And it was like, no, fill that in, right? Like it's just so expensive to do that kind of, it's beautiful, right? Like of course you want that light to filter down underneath the overhang, right? But particularly in this moment that we're in North America, and like we are in an affordability crisis, we are in a recession. Building housing is both being, it's simultaneously being promoted and being denied. Like we're just living in this really strange space. But I think my job, and I think the job of anybody who wants to work in this realm, is to continue to advocate for the human, the qualitative beauty, art, shadow, light. Like that's what these projects display, because there's a youthful understanding that that's what we need, right? But I hear you. I hear you for sure. That's the struggle.
I mean, one of our precedents for the outdoor corridor is our urban village. And I feel like there's a lot of Vancouver projects. And interestingly, we did a field trip to Toronto from Cambridge, where we have our campus. And we looked at a lot of projects from the 70s in Toronto. And a lot of them actually have open access corridors. So there are a lot of quite innovative housing projects built even in Toronto's climate, which have these kind of gallery access. So it's not impossible.
No, and I think so much of, you know, I always laugh about when I, you know, at public hearings, or when I'm talking to some of the public who are less or more resistant to change or more fearful of change. They talk often about the character of their communities, and how they want to preserve the character. And I always laugh because so much of what we're trying to do now is what we used to do. Like the entire neighborhood that I live in, Fairview Slopes in Vancouver, is a missing middle neighborhood. We have housing, cooperative housing, and co op housing down at False Creek, which was built in the 70s, which is like the model we're just trying to replicate now. So I always think that that's interesting that we actually think, I don't really think that we've invented anything. Like we're just really trying to return back to the way things used to be in a way, right? So um, so much of this is already known, right? We
Yeah.
forgot. We forgot
Yeah.
when we all moved to single family neighborhoods.
can we jump in this discussion too, or is it kind of?
Absolutely. Anyone, please jump in. Yes.
Sure. Well, thank you all. Amazing projects from the students, and thank you for your comments. And I just wanted to address Florian because I work in Germany and in Canada, and I have bad news for you. It's way easier to do in Germany than it is in Canada. So I
Oh
think
yeah.
a lot of these projects would have to struggle, would struggle. But I also have to say that Vancouver actually just supported that we can have external stairs and we don't need to pressurize the hallways. That's something we don't even do in Germany. But what you talked about, the entry to the light well, I think this is way easier to do in Germany than here, in terms of building code. And then I would like to say something general. I I come to realize way easier in Germany to do alternative solutions and not as expensive. But here we can do it, but they're really expensive. And in a market where everyone wants to go fast, they take a lot of time. So, but I also want to encourage all the young people who are here that as soon as you're an architect, every 5 years we're reviewing our building codes. And I think this is kind of where we have to be active because we are the only ones who understand that, which rules are actually in the way of doing the kind of work we want to do. And so I think we have to be more active changing the environment, and because I really think it's something, as we as architects are the only one who understand how it connects of doing these social spaces, health and well-being, and what are the technical issues which stop us, right? And so I just wanted to say that because I know both building codes quite well, and I compare them just because I'm really interested in kind of doing courtyard buildings, which I've done in Germany here, and I can tell you it's way more difficult here. Vancouver is a bit better probably than the rest because we sprinkler everything to start with. So we have it, I think, Marianne, the older buildings we have already is definitely helping. And I don't know why the building code changed, that it made it harder for the external circulation. And then we kind of go to this pressurization issue. But I think you're totally right, and the city is totally supporting it, that we do open entry exiting to buildings again. Anyway, that's what I wanted to share.
Inga, is there a project from your studio that you think brings some of these challenges into sharper focus, or?
Um, I only saw, I don't know, I thought only two projects from ours. The berm is from our studio. And we focused a lot on the point stair, on the single stair. Florian, which is something which we until recently were not allowed to do here. And we are just working on changing the building code because that has a lot to do about how we can do the smaller grain and do this courtyard buildings. And this is still not accepted. Like if you're in the city of Vancouver, there are a few pilot projects, but we tried on not in Vancouver, outside in BC, and the fire marshals the city goes, we want to do it, but our fire marshals are so against it. And in a small community, you have to listen to the fire marshals. So there's still a long way to go. But probably when we look through, a lot of this project would not be buildable as without alternative solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also think the environmental codes too are creating forms, right? And passive house building wants to be something like Tomo House is an L-shaped building, with a gabled roof, and it's a passive house, and that was hard. We really struggled to achieve the certification and get the detailing right. Like, it's not that it was hard, it's just that there's just a way easier way to do it, right? And I think the form factor has become really important for passive house or net zero or even step code buildings, that all those qualities that make um, it's like any negative space or any like jog or any outside or inside return or any inside return is a difficult thing to contend with when you're dealing with a lot of these meeting the energy requirements for high performance buildings. So for us, then it becomes about, and I mean, it's not that that bothers us, because I feel like so much of this work around affordability and wellness and beauty and human centric is like they're in opposition to each other, right? Like I just sat. Inga, did you go to that BC housing thing on the dash
No.
dash housing? Well, they BC housing has now created their own proprietary software on which to start creating housing. And sometimes I think they invite me to these things because they know, I don't know, like I'm going to be the only woman in the room and I'm going to be talking about beauty, classic, right? And like there's systems, and I believe in systems. And I think systems are what it is, creates affordability. So this is beautiful. These collages are gorgeous. So the battle or the work is between bridging those two things that are so at odds in our culture in North America anyway, about how to create beautiful places, and how to convince people that those beautiful places have value and they should be paid for. Like there needs to be a line item in the budget for like useless space, you know? Um, yeah.
Yeah. So this is from our studio,
Yeah, it's great.
and I think what I try to teach my students is that there are certain things which are system and which have to be very economical, and then you can be in the free space. You can be more, have free space as long as you get all the structure and all the services in a very economical way. And I think that also allows more flexibility long term. It's kind of, it allows a lot. So I think if we get the bones right and be economical there, I agree this can be a system. But very often what I see as system is that it's very, like the optics of it,
Yeah,
rather,
they're ugly buildings,
yeah.
which
And
is not something that we talk about a lot in school. I don't know, or that we talk about a lot maybe in our industry, like that there is actually, you can design a beautiful building. Like that is actually a skill that can be taught around composition and around all that.
It's remarkable the
Um,
degree to which it is not spoken about.
what's that?
Marianne, I think it's remarkable the degree to which it is not spoken about.
Yeah.
It's
Like, I mean,
unbelievable.
it's unbelievable. And I always feel like I'm the person, like, for me, that's so much a part of like why I think I'm in this profession is because somebody needs to be talking about the meaning of beautiful, artful buildings, ones that are composed well, that take into account um, like the little bits, and organizing the mechanical systems so that they don't interfere on the facade. Um, so I think that that part of the work is really crucial, especially as we're moving into a time where the economics are just overriding everything.
I think
yeah,
one of the things that I think we've tried to do with the Superstudio is this idea about three forms of alienation, like ecological, social, and subjective. Like I think in some ways, certainly at Waterloo, I don't think we've used the word beautiful very often, but we're interested in the ways in which alienation can set up, or the concept of alienation can set up qualitative dimensions for design, like aspirations for design itself and for the building. And I think that's been pretty generative. I think we also should open up to students that are here. We have a number of students that were in the studio. So please, I'd love to hear from you about your thoughts about these kind of questions, debates, the housing that you're seeing from your own studios and other studios, both in, yeah, either in the chat or feel free to put your camera on or put your hand up or something like that. Because I know you're thinking a lot about these things. You've invested so much time in making these beautiful designs and thinking so much about housing over the term, probably more than your instructors who have been distracted by a lot of other things too over the term.
They're all shy. Would Nicole want to say something from TMU? I see her online.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, the past semester we've been doing these housing projects, and the first project that we did was a laneway and the second was a mid-rise. It was a missing middle project, and it was really interesting to see how we were given these prompts, and each of our section professors who were guiding us along the semester and through these projects were talking about these housing as shared spaces and as spaces where the community comes together, and it veers away from, like, for example, I'm living in a suburban neighborhood right now, and although I really do love my neighbors, we don't get to interact with one another to the level that I see in some places around downtown where the apartments and like the missing middles are really focusing on creating these shared spaces. So it was really interesting to see how through the semester we were able to create such spaces and imagine what designs could help the community itself.
I I think what was interesting about the two projects that the students worked on were that they were looking at density in two different ways. With the laneway houses, they were increasing the density, doubling it essentially from what's currently allowed for laneway houses, and testing it within this neighborhood immediately adjacent to the school. And then they had to provide 2 units instead of one, plus a commercial space. So it really, at a granular level, allowed them to, for the first time, kind of look at how people can live in a close proximity but live well. And then the next project was looking at density in the midst of all these high-rise developments that are sort of being dropped on top of churches and things like that in our neighborhood at the moment, and looking at a lower level of density than what is being promoted kind of indiscriminately around TMU right now, where the students are going to school in downtown Toronto. So their mid-rise projects were bringing down the density and bringing up the level of livability and amenity and social interaction with people. So yeah, I think it was a good opportunity for pretty young undergrad second-year students who are just still learning the ropes to explore this idea of architecture as a framework for shaping people's lives.
Maybe just
I
to add.
oh, sorry,
Oh, sorry.
I was going to jump in. I'm curious, for those of you at UBC, for instance, Marianne, you mentioned BC Housing, and I'm just working with them and realizing, well, it's been a real challenge. Just as an example, working on a project in Kamloops for the whole vision for 15 years has been for young families, affordable housing for young families. But BC Housing wouldn't approve it because the unit counts didn't work out. So now we had to add 4 one-bedroom units to each floor and lose an entire floor to make their numbers work. And I always think, this is crazy that this is exactly what they were trying to get away from. They were trying to do multiple rooms so they could have large families move into these. And now we've got these units. Who knows who's going to even live in them based on the demographics they're trying to serve. But, like Ontario doesn't have, to my knowledge, a similar organization where it's kind of centralized, but it would be interesting to work with them. Like I'm just listening to this conversation today, and my interactions with BC Housing are so minimal, but they are really, quantitative in their thinking about housing. And I know it's because they're trying to translate their funding into as many units as they can get. But if BC Housing could be part of BC Housing, UBC Studios, to be part of the conversation, I think it's the cultural shift, like that Florian sort of hinted at right at the onset, right? Like because similar to you, I see, what I'm able to do in practice is very extremely restrictive compared to the amazing thinking that happens here. So I was just thinking about, I think it was you that talked about the advocacy role, and you guys have the opportunity at UBC and other provinces maybe to somehow get them folded in. Like our studio, one of the things that we've been working on for a number of years now, Adrian and I, is working with our community. So, for instance, the semester that you saw in there, we have been working with a co-op, a union co-op. So they're a housing co-op organizer, and that's been very interesting. And so what it does is it folds people from their organization into our design reviews, people that have never been to an architectural design review, for instance. We've had planning students that contributed to the studio. So I think part of this advocacy is also um, you know, reaching out beyond the boundaries of our disciplines. And I think those conversations, if we did that for a decade, in every school, really made that effort to pull in these people, like instead of, positioning them as the reason why we can't do good things. That's to me is I'm becoming more and more like this. Like your adversaries sometimes should become your closest friends and get them into your circle so at least you can have the conversation. So just wanted to say that as an observation. Like I feel like all the people I've talked to on BC Housing are very stuck in a mode of thinking it's not really their fault. It's just that's what they've been tasked to do. And
Yeah.
maybe we need to fold them in more.
Well, I think, yeah, I agree. BC Housing, I think, is going to be the largest deliverer of housing in BC over the next, however long. I think that they're a remarkable organization in a lot of ways. Like the quality of BC housing buildings is higher than often what we see in our market developments. So there's a standard that they uphold. I think that they're really inclusive. They have always have a ton of workshops, and like the workshop that I went to on the dash, like that was really for engagement, right? So there are opportunities for architects to engage in that. But I know what you mean, and I think that what's happened over like time, and it's sort of like in Vancouver, we used to have like our zoning and development bylaw was like 3/4 of an inch thick, and now it's like 6 inches thick or 4 inches thick. And I think as we've gone on and become more and more intelligent and we've also become more and more siloed and more like everyone's got their own specific um, unique selling proposition or their own specific silo that they work out of. And I think that that's why I feel like architects are so well positioned to be in those roles that you talk about going out into the community, because I think that I always consider myself to be a neutral body. Like I have an opinion, like I will design something to the best of my ability, but but my job is really to take all of that information that's being fed at me, and then deliver it into something that is generally acceptable to everyone, but doesn't 100% satisfy all of them. Do you know what I mean? Like I think that that's why I always feel like architects as advocates, as politicians, like we're really important, because that's what we build, is our capacity to go out into the community and listen, our capacity to take these two opposing things and try to find the balance between the two. And I think that this work really reflects that. And my message, I think, to the students here will be that it's wonderful to think about these solutions in a studio environment and to be creative, but there's so much work to do out there. And I know how tired everyone is, and the post-COVID era is one of wellness and self-care, but we're also super privileged, and we are in the position where we have to fight for the rights of people who don't have that voice, where we have to argue for the things that we know to be true as architects. So I really appreciate that story about you and Adrian going out into the community and engaging. I think that's where our power lies, in a way, right?
Karen.
Shows Karen's hand is up.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for this. My name's Karen. I teach at the University of Toronto, and mine was sort of an anomaly because it was a two-semester thesis studio. So it's such a pleasure to be involved in this project, and I'm so grateful to the organizers for absolutely massive amounts of work. And I wanted to share, and it was such a pleasure also to collaborate with our nearby schools. I got to be on reviews at Waterloo and TMU for some amazing studios. I learned a lot. One question, one thing that was a challenge for me in teaching this studio, and I'm curious how others dealt with it. When Adrian started this call, he said, people didn't design their courses for this Superstudio, but I missed the memo, and so I kind of did. I thought it was like Billy Fleming North, and so I kind of did. And so then it was a bit hard, right? Because then we had just multiple framings, right? We had the four ideas or the principles that are on the website for the Superstudio. Then, my own work was architecture and the right to housing. So we were looking at that framing. And then today there's another, these are all great framings, but today there's another framing, like 3 kinds of alienation, right? So I found originally I was asking my students to deal with both the frames. And then I was like, oh, this is not working. This is too much. It's too confusing. So I had to, they had learned a lot about the framing introduced by the Superstudio, but I had to cut it out as our requirements because it was just too much to deal with. So I'm just curious about that. Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, is that a question, Karen? I didn't quite.
Yeah, no, I'm curious, how did it work for everyone else? Were you successfully using the AHA 4-part framing from the Superstudio? How do people deal with that tension between how they might be framing their own studio and the framing of the overall project?
Just to kind of connect the 3-part, like ecological, social, and subjective to the principles, it's kind of buried in holistic quality. Like those 3 things are the elements that we think of as holistic quality. So I think our studio focused pretty heavily on that. Yeah, but obviously we're more familiar with the AHA work, so it would be great to hear from other people. Cheryl.
Yeah, I would say it's really nice to see all of this work come together and finally get to see what people were doing across the country. I think it was a fabulous idea, but it wasn't something we were able to manage with the students during the studio to collaborate with any other studio, even ones within the school. So we had the graduate students also doing participating in this studio, and they had their studio the same day of the week, but the same 2 days of the week. But it's so intense trying to, particularly in an undergrad studio, achieve the requirements of the studio within the curriculum, that even having time to listen to the presentations for the students, our studios are so packed. So I'm hoping to disseminate the work online, which you gathered so beautifully here, through the school. And even though the students have left, sure that they are aware of it and can take some time and see what the other students were doing. So yeah, I think it was difficult and didn't quite work the way I maybe envisioned it working at the beginning, or maybe how you envisioned it working. But I think it's still been very, very successful, and we should do a live exhibition somehow. Although that sounds complicated too, but anyway.
Well, just to
Too
add that
bad.
one of the great things about the website is we can keep adding work to it. So if there are any students here today who don't see their projects up yet, please still submit them. We're going to keep sending calls out and asking for more work from the studios to go up. We'll keep putting it up there as it comes in.
I'm really curious. I'm sure you all have talked about or thought about this, or maybe not because you've been like so in the weeds of it for the last year. But um, you know, how you're thinking about what this work does and what this kind of model, um, I don't know, maybe lends itself to now that the Super Studio is itself is kind of coming to a close. And I'm curious for a lot of reasons, but one is that, we didn't really have a plan for that on the US side when we were putting the Green New Deal Super Studio together. And I think everyone was so exhausted after many of the kind of conveners, coordinators went on, some form of sabbatical. The work itself is still there. It's still occasionally visited as a resource, but there were no, follow-up programs or initiatives outside of kind of a closing ceremony of sorts like this. And we had really high-level talks early on about things we might have wanted to do, but didn't do them. And so, yeah, I guess I'm just kind of I'm curious how you're thinking about the afterlife of this work, and whether or not this is a model you would want to employ again, or if there are other models of collaboration that make sense. And I think one of the many things that the Super Studio does is kind of chips away at the form of alienation that we all feel like from each other or towards each other, and like to the discipline and to the world outside of the academy, because it gives you kind of a common project and program, imperfect as it might be, to work towards together for a year. So there's like 8 questions in there, but I'm just really curious, what you all will do with this work, with this model, with these new relationships, or strengthen the relationships that you've built through it.
Okay, I'm going to jump in. I think some of the others are probably more appropriate to answer the kind of first part of your question, but I did want to just jump in because you asked something that I think is interesting to me, having never done something like this before. Whereas the housing in this case, which was always our goal, I think, from the beginning days of AHA, housing is not a typology, but it's a movement. And so I think that's very interesting for students to feel like that, like they're not designing a typology on a site, and that's what they're focusing on. They're thinking about it as they're part of a massive group of people trying to problem solve together. And so, I think there's some value to this, which is really, I think, again, launching from what you had done with your group in the United States. But, just thinking for myself as somebody that teaches on topics related to Indigenous design, which seems like, it's this little isolated seminar in most schools and sometimes a studio, but like it's very fragmented, that conversation about what's happening in Indigenous design. And so like this thinking about this and seeing the website as it developed that Ali put together so skillfully made me think like there's no home base for that conversation, for instance. Like I don't really know what's happening at Louisiana State University with Indigenous studios, or, and UBC does things, and all the schools are doing these things. So there's something about, I think, the seed that you guys planted with the Green New Deal to me that does open up a conversation about other topics that cross schools. And this idea that the team is working on here of a repository of information that becomes a home base. Like I think, that was the vision on the website. And the others can talk about the research grants, I think, that we're working on, those other things, that you have a location to go to, that a new student who's interested in affordable housing, or non-market housing and what's out there in the world, you can go there. So I think like that to me is very exciting. And I think this is, it's a baby step, but I think that when you mentioned the afterlife and the, the kind of people taking off their breaks out of exhaustion, I remember after we got back from Venice and we had one of these meetings, and we had these, weekly meetings in our calendars, and we had the conversation like, are we going to continue with these meetings? Like, are we done? And the meetings have just stayed in our calendars. And so that was in 2001. We were having a laugh about that, Aisha. And so it's 5 years later, and we're just it's just bleeding into a future, a blurry future for all of us. But I think that's kind of how we're approaching it. I also think like our team, there's so many people involved that some people kind of float in and out depending on when, life circumstances and studios. And so it's got kind of a life and energy of its own. So I'm hopeful that that keeps on going. But I don't know if somebody wants to jump in and talk about the research grants and the other things that AHA is doing.
I mean, I just dropped this in the chat, so I'll just say it. We kind of have three, we being the AHA crew, have three areas we feel like we're working in now. So we're working on exhibitions. That's still kind of a part of what we like to think of ourselves as doing. Pedagogy, and the Superstudio project really was about pedagogy, really trying to think about how do we help students see and understand and explore and create within this realm of housing. And then research. So for the research area, we have a SSHRC grant where we're looking at decommodified housing examples in Vancouver and Toronto as a kind of first start to start documenting, redrawing great examples of existing housing that's here that we don't think about maybe often enough, or kind of analyze in this lens. So we're redrawing projects, and we'll share these on another website most likely. So that work is coming too. But yeah, as far as
and maybe a book,
exactly. I think we really thought that this was a chance to like get students, like transform students thinking about housing, and it wasn't so much about how we were trying to, I don't know, reshape housing policy necessarily. There are other people out there doing great work with that.
I mean, we'll see if we have the energy down the road, but we may do another iteration of this. There's already been a few sentences shared here and there about it. But and I mean, it's really interesting today's conversation about how doing it again could improve and build upon it. And maybe, I mean, this conversation about Salah's heightened involvement with BC housing, for example. I mean, maybe there is a version where integrated into the building of the logic, the pedagogical model, and the framework is a collaboration with an entity like BC Housing, for instance, or certain developers from the private space that are really interested in or trying to chip away at disalienation. So I think it's kind of fascinating how we could extend the collaborations moving forward, and maybe frame things. This whole question about what are the obstacles, right? We all know that a certain type of circulation and access to light is great, but we can't achieve it. So maybe even something more pointed around, like head on, what are the real obstacles to achieving what we know are great design solutions could be an exciting next iteration. Superstudio 2.0.
What I know Florian has their hand up, so I'll be really quickly. Sorry. Just the one thing I would maybe say to think about for you all before everyone scatters for the summer, I kind of did this informally with everyone I could get contact for, but we have almost like an alumni network of the Superstudio now, which, at the time I think was like 1,500 students or something. And I think we wound up with maybe like 20% or so of them on kind of a listserv together. And we all try to keep in touch. We see each other at conferences. A couple of them have started practices together, and it's a really fun way to track like unexpected outcomes from this sort of thing. So while you can, before all your students disappear into the summer ether, the more you can kind of keep them connected, I think after this in some way, the better.
That sounds great. Florian, we'd love to hear more from you.
What just also as a motivation for you, speaking from Germany, because I think 20 years ago, or maybe a bit longer ago, there was also a very different situation in Germany, where there was nothing really developing in the housing um, design, I would say. And I think there's really now a push, which is to do with, in the end, with teaching and research coming from university. So it's a network of people that have all been, yeah, like you, like they experience good education at schools, and suddenly there was a drive, and I think it was also to do to a certain closeness to Switzerland, where there was similar um, things going on, and suddenly things seem possible, which didn't seem possible some years ago. And I think it's only through the connection to university in the end. So where all these questions were raised, where people got in touch and maybe also were confronted with, okay, it's not possible right now, but that these people said, okay, like we want to try it out, and we want to be advocate for these ideas, and we are young and we are motivated, and we are also willing to take certain risks. And of course, that doesn't change the whole housing system of Germany straight away. And I think it's a very minor percentage, but I think it's so nice to see that something is changing. And I think it's also just a discussion about this in politics. And so they are suddenly there. And so this is why I also again want to congratulate you to do this Superstudio. And I think I just wanted to motivate you, keep on doing this, because in the end it's the students that you are attending right now, that you are studying right now, that will be the future architects. And so you need to learn the ideas. And I think we also should consider this work, what you did, as a really substantial piece of research, which I think in other fields of academia you would of course knowledge or accept as something really valuable. And I think there was, or at least in Germany, there was also sometimes a tradition that, yeah, you would look at piece like student work from architecture schools as something which doesn't have to do anything to do with reality. And also because of that, it cannot be any valuable research which goes out or is in any connection with the world outside. And I think that's completely wrong. And I think your studio also shows that there can be this connection, and that doesn't mean that all these buildings need to be built tomorrow in Canada. But yeah, I think I just wanted to, yeah, share my motivation, which I have from Europe as well. And I think can be something possible like this in Canada as well.
Thanks so much, Florian. Maybe we should, I just want to address Usama Nassim's question.
Yeah, that's all I was trying to do. Summa, do you want
I
to
don't know
say
if
it?
you
Do you want me to say it?
say it. Yeah. Usama,
Uh,
are you there?
yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Usama from U of T. Sorry, my camera's not working, so I'm just gonna stick with the audio. Yeah, so this has been an awesome experience in terms of like trying to connect our architectural learning with all these great ideas that AHA has been advancing. And now that I'm done with grad school and have to find work, so I'm kind of like struggling to, connect this interest that I have with my future career in architecture. So I was just wondering if you have any suggestions or thoughts or advice for students who want to continue this kind of work in their professional practice, and like how to find or engage firms that are interested in like advancing these goals through their work. Thanks.
I mean, one thing I would say is think about the architecture lobby and the Toronto chapter. That's a way to think about, I think, some of the activism that you're already engaged in. And I guess, I don't know if others have other suggestions, but I think, Architects Against Housing Alienation tried to bring together some architects who we felt were already working as advocates in different ways. And I think there are lots of practices that are, as Marianne was suggesting, already working as advocates, sometimes in networked ways and sometimes, more individually. But I don't think I would want to recommend any specific practices right now, but I think, I think you can find allies, both in young graduates through the architecture lobby and in more established firms.
Yeah, I would say, Usama, that housing is the issue of our time right now. Its urgency, I think, became really apparent to the entire population, like all at once. Which is remarkable because there have been so many people fighting for housing affordability and for decades and decades. So I think if you walk into a firm that works on housing projects and you display the passion and the resolve that this work shows, that you will find the importance of your voice. I think that a lot of people, maybe I speak for Inga a little bit, I don't know, but myself, like the work is tiring. Like it's trying to do good architecture, meaningful architecture within this milieu, particularly as the affordability crisis like becomes more and more dominant. Like we need young people to take up this charge. And your energy and your perspective and your position are like you're next, right? Like I think that that's what you're going to find when you get out there, is that it will come to you probably more easily than you will need to seek it if you are authentically putting yourself out there in the way that this work shows.
I would just add to all of this great advice too, is to just keep an open mind about like what spatial practice means to you, like throughout your career. And I had students who've gone to conventional or even research-based offices, and been able to carry forward some of the things they were able to kind of begin in their thesis or graduate studies. Not always in a built kind of form, often in like a research or exhibition format, but also sometimes in built form. I've had students go work in some organ of government, right? In like a municipality, or in your case, province, or county or state, and do far less visual work and far more kind of code and policy and politicking kind of work. And sometimes that's fulfilling for them, and sometimes they get there and realize that's not the right place for them. And so I just would, I think there's no wrong answer to what you try first. And if it's not the right place for you, you can keep looking around. You shouldn't feel like you have to do one or the other, just because it's a well-worn or less well-worn path for an architecture graduate.
So we didn't have a big conversation about futures, and Billy, thank you so much for kind of turning us in that direction. I think we certainly have some things to think about next steps, but I think we really appreciate the thought that Billy, you and Marianne and Florian have brought to this conversation. your generosity and your engagement and thoughtful reading of these projects is really, really appreciated. And it's been amazing working with all of these faculty from across Canada. And I'm not going to list everybody, but in the meeting today, I think we had Cheryl and Inga and Karen and Maurizio and Tony and others like Rob and Sean and Tura and Julia.
And two
Thank you.
Cheryls. Remember, we have two Cheryls.
Oh yeah. We really appreciate all the hard work that you've put into the teaching, and obviously to the students. The students have put in the hardest work of all, and I think the work is really amazing, really beautiful to see, and very inspiring around I think this call for thinking about architects not just as solving, technical questions, but creating beauty and also advocating and acting as advocates, advocates and activists to try to really make change happen in housing. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
What about
Thanks,
next
everyone.
steps?
Good
Thanks,
job.
everybody.
Keep our list going.
Thank you to the team, Sarah and all of you. I think I also don't see all the names. It was amazing. It was great for us to connect. I made many connections. I was actually involved in BCIT and in Calgary and in BC, and I really enjoyed that. And I think we should continue this, that we somehow do some cross-pollination between the schools. I thought this was pretty amazing. Thank you so much, Matthew. I forgot you, of course, of all of you organizing it. I know it's a lot of work, and I hope this website stays up as a tool that we can also, take it to future students as a starting point and continue working on it. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you,
All right, thank you
everyone.
all.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.